Hello, friends. Hello, hello. Hey, Star, good to see you. How are you? Happy Thursday. How are we doing today? How are we doing this week? The week is almost over. Are we big St. Patrick's Day fans? Are we going to be celebrating tomorrow? I'm not. I will not be celebrating. I will be staying inside away from the chaos. Although this is the first year that I have made corned beef. Yeah, corned beef, potatoes, and cabbage. I made it in the crock pot and it's delicious. It's delicious. Although I don't know if I need to make it every year. I guess once a year is fine. It's fine. Star, I'm doing all right. I'm doing all right. Hey, Wadsworth. Hello, hello. Welcome in. Good to see you. Good to see you. Opening up boop. Oh, thank you so much for contributing to Sunday stream. We are officially 50% of the way there. Amazing. And Wadsworth. Same. Um, feel like, oh, some adult news. Well, adulting news. I got a new clothes washer dryer with my tax refund, and I just did laundry today. And let me tell ya, I've never had clothes come out of the dryer the first time very dry. It was wonderful. And I didn't have any issues with opening the door when the washer was done. It was a wild time. I didn't know what to do with myself. Also, it didn't take like the whole day to do one load of laundry, and I think I can get used to this. And it makes me so sad that I'm excited about it. Laundry stream one. And it plays a song when it's done. Like it likes like and I don't know what the song is, but it sings and it's wonderful. Your dryer's on the way out, yes. But you owe this year, oh no. We owed last year, and yeah, it's not a fun time. It's never fun, because then you look back at like how many taxes that you've paid throughout the year, and you're like, isn't that enough? I think it's enough. Oh, taxes, am I right? But yeah, so new washer dryer, made corned beef for the first time this year, never done it before. Did it in the crock pot, super, super stinking easy. It was delightful. I made it yesterday and we're gonna be like eating leftovers. But yeah, like St. Patrick's Day just like isn't a thing for me. At least not anymore. Like in college, like sure, keg of green beer at somebody's house, super fun and amazing. But that's not my thing anymore. It's not my vibe to be waking up at like 6 in the morning to immediately go to a pub. Not anymore. Your washer dryer just quietly stop. You have to guess when it's done. But also very considerate. You used to have one that played the fishy song from Sherlock Holmes. That sounds amazing. I don't know if I can change the song. And I haven't made enough laundry. I haven't done enough laundry to know if it's the same song each time. I don't know, but I get excited when I hear it. You have to keep an open ear. Yeah, yeah. It's a guessing game. There was something else that was really cool. So I haven't used this feature, and I don't know why it needs to happen, but it also connects to the Wi-Fi, and I don't know why. Why do you need to be on my Wi-Fi? I don't know. I don't understand. But that's a thing. I don't know. You're watching that movie and both looked at each other at the same time. Wait a minute. That's great. Isn't that the old washing machine song? Sherlock Holmes was clearly influenced by it. Totally not the other way around. Absolutely not. Yeah, and laundry didn't take me like 5 hours for like 2 loads. It was wonderful. I actually did other things in the day. I mean, I can do other things regularly during laundry, but whatever. It is so the government can make sure you're clean your clothes for the appropriate amount of time. Yeah, and not a minute over. Hello, Falcor. Hello, welcome in. Good to see you. We're talking about laundry. Yeah, the government needs to know how often I do laundry and what the cycles are. I really don't know why it needs to connect to the Wi-Fi. Um, I think it has, so like for each of the settings, like normal, heavy, like bedding, like it has a bunch of different settings. But for each of them, there are specific like sub settings that you can change, like temperature or like there's something else. Oh, like how dirty your clothes are, things like that. But some of the settings you can't change once you get to a certain thing. But I think like when you change all of the settings that you want it to, it's supposed to remember, and maybe that's why it needs the Wi-Fi. I really don't know. I don't know. The level of filth. How filthy were you this week? Mooog has washed her hoodie for exactly 3 minutes too long. Exactly. Charge her more on taxes. Just wasting water over here. Dang it. Shouldn't have gotten the high-tech one. It's cool. It's cool. We'll see. Once I figure out why why it's there and and what good it does, then we'll see. Maybe if it's connected to the Wi-Fi, it'll sing different songs. No, I don't think that's right. I don't think that's gonna happen. I don't know. I think you're right, Star. I think I'm just gonna be charged in taxes if I overwash my clothes. And it also, so in the washer, we'll stop talking about laundry as soon as I say this one other weird thing because it just like blew my mind because it's so high tech and I don't understand how it works. But in the washer, like before it actually starts like washing, it like moves a couple times and it figures out how heavy the clothes are that you put in, like how heavy your load is, and then it determines how long the wash is. And that is wild to me. That is just so wild and I don't understand it. I don't know. I don't know the science behind laundry. Basically is what I have come to learn. We'll see. We'll see how this goes. But if I am ever late to a stream, it's probably because my laundry has been attacking me because it knows everything about me now. When the machines take over, the laundry is going to be the first one. So Alexa and Google can control them remotely from your phone. I think you're right. I think that's a thing. I didn't read all of the manual. There's like 2 manuals and they are very large and I didn't read all of them. You miss having in suite, yes. Yeah. Um the current place that I'm in has in suite and before did not. And I am just so happy that it does. So yes, I feel your pain, Falcor. I feel it. Oh, all right. Also, I like drop everything. Like if I'm transporting laundry, there's like a trail that follows me. If it actually sorted and loaded. You know, folding. Can you please fold the laundry for me and put it away? That's the part that like is the slower part for me. I can fold it, but then then I put it on my bed so that like I have to put it away before I go to sleep. But then I just carefully move all of the folded clothes onto the floor when I go to sleep. So I usually have just like a couple piles of folded laundry on the floor. Yes, the only thing that you would ever use coins for. Yes. You just sleep beside it. Amazing. It's like a body pillow. And if it's still warm, bonus points. All right. Today, we are starting a new book, a science fiction book by Andre Norton. Andre Norton is a pen name for. See, I always start sentences and they start very confidently, and then I get scared that I'm going to say the wrong name. So let me just double check. I think it's Alice, but let me just check. Good old Google over here. I could probably just ask my Google, but I get terrified when Google just responds to me when I'm not asking. So I'm not going to do it. Yes, Alice Norton. Okay. So, pen name for Alice Norton. She used to write historical fiction and then fantasy and then moved to science fiction. So we'll see how that is influenced to see like if there's other elements thrown in or if the storytelling feels different than science fiction. I don't know. But this was also supposed to be the first in a series, and there are no other books in this series. So I'm kind of hoping that it doesn't end on a cliffhanger and then we'll just never know the answer. I'm hoping that it's more like episodic, that it's like, okay, this is like one adventure with this person. And then the other books will just be other adventures and not necessarily be like the story is incomplete. Because she has written other series as well. I don't know. We'll find out together. Let's see. Oh, there's a transcriber's note. That's exciting. Oh, it's not very exciting. Never mind. It's not that exciting. Okay, there's 18 chapters. We'll see how it goes. Before we get started, other reading updates. I don't think so. Nothing to report. I'm currently reading deluxe edition 10 of Berserk. So volume-wise, I'm in the midst of volume 29. I think that's it. I'll be back tomorrow doing reading sprints. I'm sure I'll have a more comprehensive understanding of what I'm reading then. But I'm just excited to read this. Science fiction is my favorite genre, so I'm excited to go back to it after taking a break from it for a little bit. All right, let's just do it. Let's do it. Hold on, I need a crisscross applesauce in here. You're always asleep. That's totally fine. That's totally cool. Different time zones, and you also have like a very different sleep schedule as well. I think I heard you talking about that the other day. Okay, let's do it. Let's jump in. All right, chapter 1. Starting out strong. Disaster. The Throg task force struck the Terran survey camp a few minutes after dawn, without warning, and with a deadly precision which argued that the aliens had fully reconnoitered and prepared that attack. Eye-searing lances of energy lashed back and forth across the base with methodical accuracy. And with a single cowering witness, flattened on a ledge in the heights above, knew that when the last of those yellow-red bolts fell, nothing human would be left alive down there. His teeth closed hard upon the thick stuff of the sleeve coverings, covering his thin forearm, and in his throat a scream of terror and rage was stillborn. More than caution kept him pinned on that narrow shelf of rock. Watching that holocaust below, Shan Lanti could not force himself to move. The sheer ruthlessness of the Throg move-in left him momentarily weak. To listen to a tale of Throgs in action, and to be an eye-witness to such action, were two vastly different things. He shivered in spite of the warmth of the Survey Corps, or Corps uniform. As yet he had sighted none of the aliens, only their plate-shaped flyers. They would stay aloft until their long-range weapons cleared out all opposition. But how had they been able to make such a complete annihilation of the Terran force? The last report had placed the nearest Throg nest at least 2 systems away from Warlock, and a patrol plane had been drawn about the Circe system the minute that survey had marked its second planet ready for colonization. Somehow the beetles had slipped through that supposedly tight cordon and would now consolidate their gains with their usual speed at rooting. First, an energy attack to finish the small Terran force. Then, they would simply take over. A month later, or maybe 2 months, and they could not have done it. The grids would have been up, and any Throg ship venturing into Warlock's amber-tinted sky would abruptly cease to be. In the race for survival as a galactic power, Terra had that one small edge over the swarms of the enemy. They need only stake out their newfound world and get the grids assembled on its surface. Then that planet would be locked to the beetles. The critical period was between the first discovery of a suitable colony world and the erection of grid control. Planets in the past had been lost during that time lag, just as Warlock was lost now. Throgs and Terrans. For more than a century now, planet time, they had been fighting their odd, twisted war among the stars. Terrans hunted worlds for colonization, the old hunger for land of their own driving men from the overpopulated worlds out of Sol's system to the far stars. And those worlds barren of intelligent native life, open to settlers, were none too many and widely scattered. Perhaps 6 were found in a quarter century, and of that 6, maybe only 1 was suitable for human life without any costly and lengthy adaptation of man to world. Warlock was one of the lucky finds which came so seldom. Throgs were predators, living on the loot they garnered. As yet, mankind had not been able to discover whether they did indeed swarm from any home world. Perhaps they lived internally on board their plate ships with no permanent base, forced into a wandering life by the destruction of the planet on which they had originally been spawned. I think they are humans from Earth, yes, and that Throgs are alien species from a different planet that are colonizing other worlds. Yes, Falkor, I think that's right. But they were raiders now, laying waste defenseless worlds, picking up the wealth of shattered cities in which no native life remained. And their hidden temporary bases were looped about the galaxy, their need for worlds with an atmosphere similar to Terra's as necessary as that of man. For in spite of their grotesque insectile bodies, their wholly alien minds, the Throgs were warm-blooded, oxygen-breathing creatures. After the first few clashes, the early Terran explorers had endeavored to promote a truce between the species, only to discover that between Throg and man there appeared to be no meeting ground at all, total differences of mental processes producing insurmountable misunderstanding. There was simply no point of communication. So the Terrans had suffered one smarting defeat after another until they perfected the grid. And now their colonies were safe, at least when time worked in their favor. It had not on Warlock. A last vivid lash of red cracked over the huddle of domes in the valley. Shan blinked, half blinded by that glare. His jaws ached as he unclenched his teeth. That was the finish. Breathing raggedly, he raised his head, beginning to realize that he was the only one of his kind left alive on a none too hospitable world controlled by enemies, without shelter or supplies. He edged back into the narrow cleft which was the entrance to the ledge. As a representative of his species, he was not impressive, and now with those shudders he could not master, shaking his thin body, he looked even smaller and more vulnerable. Shan drew his knees up close under his chin. The hood of his woodsman's jacket was pushed back in spite of the chill of the morning, and he wiped the back of his hand across his lips and chin in an oddly childish gesture. None of the men below who had been alive only minutes earlier had been close friends of his. Shan had never known anyone but acquaintances in his short, roving life. Most people had ignored him completely, except to give orders, and one or two had been actively malicious, like Garth Thorvald. Shan grimaced at a certain recent memory, and then that grimace faded into wonder. If young Thorvald hadn't purposefully tried to get Shan into trouble by opening the Wolverine's cage, Shan wouldn't be here now, alive and safe for a time. He'd have been down there with the others. The Wolverines. For the first time since Shan had heard the crackle of the throng attack, he remembered the reason he had been heading into the hills. Of all the men on the survey team, Shan Lanty had been the least important. The dirty, tedious cleanup jobs, the dull routines which required no technical training but which had to be performed to keep the camp functioning comfortably, those had been his portion. And he had accepted that status willingly, just to have a chance to be included among survey personnel. Not that he had the slightest hope of climbing up to even an SE3 rating in the service. Part of those menial activities had been to clean the animal cages, and there Shan Lanty had found something new, something so absorbing that most of the tiring dull labor had ceased to exist except as tasks to finish before he could return to the fascination of the animal runs. Survey teams had early discovered the advantage of using mutated and highly trained Terran animals as assistants in the exploration of strange worlds. From the biological laboratories and breeding farms on Terra came a trickle of specialized aides de camp to accompany men into space. Some were fighters, silent, more deadly than weapons a man wore at his belt or carried in his hands. Some were keener eyes, keener noses, keener scouts than the human kind could produce, bred for intelligence, for size, for adaptability to alien conditions. The animal explorers from Terra were prized. Wolverines, the ancient devils of the Northlands on Terra, were being tried for the first time on Warlock. Their caution, a quality highly developed in their breed, made them testers for new territory. Able to tackle and battle an animal 3 times their size, they should be added protection for the man they accompanied into the wilderness, and their wide-ranging, their ability to climb and swim, and above all, their curiosity were assets. Shan had begun contact by cleaning their cages. He ended captivated by these miniature bears with long, bushy tails, and to his unbounded delight, the attraction was mutual. Alone to Taggy and Togi, he was a person, an important person. Those teeth, which could tear flesh into ragged strips, nipped gently at his fingers, closed without any pressure on arm, even on nose and chin in what was the ultimate caress of their kind. Since they were escape artists of no mean ability, twice he had had to track and lead them back to camp from forays of their own devising. But the second time he had been caught by Fadakar, the chief of animal control, before he could lock up the delinquents. And the memory of the resulting interview still had the power to make him flush with impotent anger. Shan's explanation had been contemptuously brushed aside, and he had been delivered an ultimatum. If his carelessness occurred again, he would be sent back on the next supply ship to be dismissed without an official sign-off on his work record, thus locked out of even the lowest level of survey for the rest of his life. That was why Garth Torval's act of the night before had made Shan brave the unknown darkness of Warlock alone when he had discovered that the test animals were gone. He had to locate and return them before Fadakar made his morning inspection. Garth Thorval's attempt to get him into bad trouble had saved his life. Shan cowered back, striving to make his huddled body as small as possible. One of the Throg flyers appeared silently out of the misty amber of the morning sky, hovering over the silent camp. The aliens were coming in to inspect the site of their victory, and the safest place for any Terran now was as far from the vicinity of those silent domes as he could get. Shan's slight body was an asset as he wedged through the narrow mouth of a cleft and so back into the cliff wall. The climb before him he knew in part, for this was the path the Wolverines had followed on their 2 other escapes. A few moments of tricky scrambling, and he was out in a cup-like depression, choked with brush covered with the purplish foliage of Warlock. On the other side of that was a small cut to a sloping hillside, giving on another valley, not as wide as that in which the camp stood, but one well provided with cover in the way of trees and high-growing bushes. A light wind pushed among the trees, and twice Shan heard the harsh, rasping call of a clack, clack. One of the bat-like, leather-winged flyers that layered in pits along the cliff walls. That present snap of two-tone complaint suggested that the land was empty of strangers. For the clack-clacks vociferously. Man, that's a hard one to say. Hold on. Vehement or clamorous. Okay, I'm just going to throw it in chat so my stumbling, you'll be able to see what it is. Vociferously. One of those words that I don't think I've ever had to say out loud. Oh, good. It comes with a pronunciation link. Let's see. Oh, hey there, Noodle.
Vociferously.
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 There we go. Vociferously. Learned a new word. Vociferously. Thank you, Popcorn. Let's see. Where are we? Okay. For the clack-clacks vociferously and loudly resented encroachment on their chosen hunting territory. Shan hesitated. He was driven by the urge to put as much distance between him and the landing Throg ship as he could. But to arouse the attention of inquisitive clack-clacks was asking for trouble. Perhaps it would be best to keep on along the top of the cliff, rather than risk a descent to take cover in the valley the flyers patrolled. A patch of dust, sheltered by a tooth-shaped projection of rock, gave the Terran his first proof that Taggy and his mate had preceded him, for printed firmly there was the familiar paw mark of a wolverine. Shan began to hope that both animals had taken to cover in the wilderness ahead. He licked dry lips. Having left secretly without any emergency pack, he had no canteen, and now Shan inventoried his scant possessions: a field kit, heavy-duty clothing, a short hooded jacket with attached mittens, the breast marked with the survey insignia. His belt supported a sheathed stunner and bush knife, and seam pockets held 3 credit tokens: a twist of wire intended to reinforce the latch of the Wolverine cage, a packet of Bravo tablets, 2 identity and 2 work cards, and a length of cord. No rations, save the Bravos. No extra charge for his stunner. But he did have, weighing down a loop on the jacket, a small atomic torch. The path he followed ended abruptly in a cliff drop, and Shan made a face at the odor rising from below, even though that scent meant he could climb down to the valley floor here without fearing any clack-clack attention. Chemical fumes from a mineral spring funneled against the wall, warding off any nesting in this section. Shan drew up the hood of his jacket and snapped the transparent face mask into place. He must get away, then find food, water, a hiding place. That will to live, which had made Shan Lanty fight innumerable battles in the past, was in command, bracing him with a stubborn determination. The fumes swirled up in a smoke haze about his waist, but he strode on, heading for the open valley and cleaner air. That sickly lavender vegetation bordering the spring deepened in color to the normal purple-green, and then he was in a grove of trees. Their branches pointed skyward at sharp angles to the rust-red trunks. A small skitterer burst from moss-spotted ground covering, giving it an alarmed squeak, skimming out of sight as suddenly as it had appeared. Shan squeezed between two trees and then paused. The trunk of the larger was deeply scored with scratches, dripping viscid globs of sap, a sap which was a bright froth of scarlet. Taggy had left his mark here, and not too long ago. The soft carpet of moss showed no paw marks, but he thought he knew the goal of the animals, a lake down valley. Shan was beginning to plan now. The Throgs had blasted the Terran camp out of existence. They had only made sure of the death of its occupiers, which meant they must have, for some use, the installations. For the general loot of a survey field camp would be relatively worthless to those who picked over the treasure of entire cities elsewhere. Why? What did the Throgs want? And would the alien invaders continue to occupy the domes for long? Shan did not realize what had happened to him since that shock of ruthless attack. From early childhood, when he had been thrown on his own to scratch a living, a borderline existence of a living, on the dumps of Tyr, he had to use his wits to keep life in a scrawny and undersized body. However, since he had been eating regularly from survey rations, he was not quite so scrawny anymore. His formal education was close to zero, his informal and off-center schooling vast. And that particular toughening process, which had been working on him for years now, aided in his speedy adaptation to a new set of facts, formidable ones. He was alone on a strange and perhaps hostile world. Water, food, safe shelter, those were important now. And once again, away from the ordered round of the camp, where he had ruled by the desires and requirements of others, he was thinking, planning in freedom. Later, his hand went to the butt of his stunner. Perhaps later, he might just find a way of extracting an accounting from the beetle faces, too. For the present, he would have to keep away from the Throgs, which meant well away from the camp. A fleck of green showed through the amethyst foliage before him. The lake. Shan wriggled through a last bush barrier and stood to look out over that surface. A sleek brown head bobbed up. Shan put fingers to his mouth and whistled. The head turned. Black button eyes regarded him. Short legs began to churn water. To his gratification, the swimmer was obeying his summons. Taggy came ashore, pausing on the fine gray sand of the verge to shake himself vigorously. Then the wolverine came upslope at a clumsy gallop to Shan. With an unknown feeling swelling inside him, the Terran went down on both knees, burying both hands in the coarse brown fur, warming to the uproarious welcome Taggy gave him. "Togi?" Shan asked, as if the other could answer. He gazed back to the lake, but Taggy's mate was nowhere in sight. The blunt head under his hand swung round, black button nose pointed north. Shan had never been sure just how intelligent, as mankind measured intelligence, the wolverines were. He had come to suspect that Fadakar and the other experts had underrated them, and that both beasts understood more than they were given credit for. Now he followed an experiment of his own, one he had had a chance to try a few times before, and never at length. Pressing his palm flat on Taggy's head, Shan thought of Throgs and of their attack, trying to arouse in the animal a corresponding reaction to his own horror and anger. And Taggy responded. A mutter became a growl. Teeth gleamed. Those cruel teeth of a carnivore to whom they were weapons of aggression. Danger. Shan thought. Danger. Then he raised his hand, and the wolverine shuffled off, heading north. The man followed. They discovered Togi busy in a small cove where a jagged tangle of drift made a mat We're going to start that sentence over. They discovered Togi busy in a small cove where a jagged tangle of drift made a mat dating from the last high water period. She was finishing a hearty breakfast, the remains of a water rat being buried thriftily against future need after the instincts of her kind. When she was done, she came to Shan, inquiry plain to read in her eyes. There was water here, and good hunting, but the site was too close to the Throgs. Let one of their exploring flyers sight them, and the little group was finished. Better cover. That's what the 3 fugitives must have. Shan scowled, not at Togi, but at the landscape. He was tired and hungry, but he must keep on going. A stream fed into the cove from the west, a guide of sorts. With very little knowledge of the countryside, Shan was inclined to follow that. Overhead, the sun made its usual golden haze of the sky. A flight of vivid green streaks marked a flock of lake ducks coming for a morning feeding. Lake duck was good eating, but Shan had no time to hunt one now. Togi started down the bank of the stream, Taggy behind her. Either they had caught his choice subtly through some undefined mental contact, or they had already picked that road on their own. Shan's attention was caught by a piece of the drift. He twisted the length free and had his first weapon of his own manufacture, a club. Using it to hold back a low sweeping branch, he followed the wolverines. Within the half hour he had breakfast, too. A pair of limp skitterers, their long hind feet lashed together with a thong of grass, hung from his belt. They were not particularly good eating, but they were meat and acceptable. Noodles, yes. Okay, so we are super close to the end of the chapter, so I'm going to finish the chapter, and then we'll go through what from the start. The 3, man and wolverines, made their way up the stream to the valley wall and through a feeder ravine into the larger space beyond. There, where the stream was born at the foot of a falls, they made their first camp. Judging that the morning haze would veil any smoke, Shan built a pocket-sized fire. He seared rather than roasted the skitterers after he had made an awkward and messy business of skinning them, and tore the meat from the delicate bones in greedy mouthfuls. The wolverines lay side by side on the gravel, now and again raising a head alertly to test the scent on the air or gaze into the distance. Taggy made a warning sound deep in the throat. Shan tossed handfuls of sand over the dying fire. He had only time to fling himself face down, hoping the drab and weathered cloth of his uniform faded into the color of the earth on which he lay, every muscle tense. A shadow swung across the hillside. Shan's shoulders hunched, and he cowered again. That terror he had known on the ledge was back in full force as he waited for the beam to lick at him as it had earlier at his fellows. The Throgs were on the hunt. End of chapter 1. All right, recap. Also, hello, Captain Hardship. Good to see you. All right, so we have our main character, Shan, and he is the only survivor on this exploration mission. So he is a Terran from the planet Terra, which I'm assuming is very, very similar to Earth. And they are going from planet to planet in search of other worlds that have breathable air because they're expanding, because they don't have the resources that they need, and their planet is dying. So they're going out into all of these other places, and there's this alien race called Throgs, and they are conquerors, and they are very much into colonization, and they pretty much just like destroy and take over for themselves. So Shan's crew landed, and he is a self-described uh, the least useful person on this mission. So he's the person who cleans after everybody and like make sure that everything is not in working order but is like put away, like that sort of thing. So he doesn't really have like any weapons background or any like scientific knowledge or anything like that. And one of his friends played a trick on him to in that like the animals that he was taking care of were released, and this is like a final straw for Shan, so he went to go and secure the cages, and while he was away doing that, the Throgs came and conquered his whole team. So they're gone, and he's the only one left. So now he's the only one left with a Wolverine that has been enhanced and trained for exploration and for like missions like this. And that's about where we are. Captain Hardship, thank you so much for contributing to April's Sunday stream. Yeah, Terra is awful. Or not awful, is often the galactic name for Earth. Yes, yes, yes. Okay. I'm just not as familiar with sci-fi. Yeah. Which sci-fi? Love your insight. Yes, of course. Yes, yes, yes. There are two main types of at least space exploration um, characters. There's the one who is like the military dog and very active and knows how to do everything and like MacGyver type deal, but also like very militant. And there is the underdog who just like doesn't know what he's doing. There's also usually a super, super scientific person who's also very resourceful. And being the only one left on your crew is a huge trope. Yes. To varying degrees of like who it is. Um, no, please. Is Star Wars. Ah, see. That's a hard one. I would say it like really blurs the line between science fiction and fantasy, and I'm leaning more towards fantasy. But I could easily be convinced. What am I drinking? I am drinking a berry LaCroix. If I can take it out. Oh, you can't see it. There's glare. It's 100% fantasy. Yeah. I can I can I can be convinced either way, but yeah. I see it as a fantasy. It's a space opera. Yes, that's true, Wadsworth. It depends on whether you think midichlorians are science or fantasy. It's fantasy. It's geology. It's all based on fact. It is a documentary. Spears, thank you so much for the follow. Hello, hi, welcome in. It's getting serious now. Yes, yes, it is much. Yes, Captain Hardship, you're totally right. It is more pulp. Oh, and we're challenging Little Bean. Love to see it. Love to see it. So yeah, we have this guy all by himself with a Wolverine and a bunch of alien Trogs to that want to destroy him. And we don't know why they didn't destroy the camp. They left the camp intact. They only a little bean one. Next time, Spears, next time. Yeah, pulp can be fun. It can also be not so fun. So we'll see. We'll see. All right, let's do it. Chapter 2. It's over. Chapter 2. Death of a Ship. That sigh of displaced air was not as loud as a breeze, but it echoed monstrously in Shan's ear. He could not believe in his luck as that sound grew fainter, drew away into the valley he had just left. With infinite caution, he raised his head from his arms, still hardly able to accept the fact that he had not been sighted, that the Throgs and their flyer were gone. But that black plate was spinning out into the sun haze. One of the beetles might have suspected that there were Terran fugitives and ordered a routine patrol. So anytime they mention beetles, it's in reference to the Throgs because of their, body composition. After all, how could the aliens know that they had caught all but one of the survey party in camp? Though with all the Terran scout flitters grounded on the field, the men dead in their bunks, the surprise would seem to be complete. As Shan moved, Taggy and Togi came to life also. They had gone to Earth with speed, and the man was sure that both beasts had sensed danger. Not for the first time he knew a burning desire for the formal education he had never had. In camp, he had listened, dragging out routine jobs in order to overhear reports and the small talk of specialists keen on their own particular hobbies. But so much of the information Shan had thus picked up to store in a retentive memory he had not understood and could not fit together. It had been as if he were trying to solve some highly important puzzle with at least a quarter of the necessary pieces missing, or with unrelated bits from others intermixed. How much control did a trained animal scout have over his furred or feathered assistants? And was part of that mastery a mental rapport built up between man and animal? How well would the Wolverines obey him now, especially when they would not return to camp where cages stood waiting as symbols of human authority? Wouldn't a trek into the wilderness bring about a revolt for complete freedom? If Shan could depend upon the animals, it would mean a great deal. Not only would their superior hunting ability provide all three with food, but their scouting senses, so much keener than his, might erect a slender wall between life and death. Few large native beasts had been discovered on Warlock by the Terran explorers, and of those 4 or 5 different species, none had proved hostile, if unprovoked. But that did not mean that somewhere back in the wild lands into which Shan was their own particular oh my gosh. I clicked forward and the page took me back. Okay. But that did not mean that somewhere back in the wild lands into which Shan was heading, there were no heretofore unknowns, perhaps slyer and as vicious as the Wolverines when they were aroused to rage. Then there were the dreams, which had afforded the prime source of camp discussion and dispute. Shan brushed coarse sand from his boots and thought about the dreams. Did they, or did they not exist? You could start an argument any time by making a definite statement for or against the peculiar sort of dreaming reported by the first scout to set ship on this world. The Circe system, of which Warlock was the second of 3 planets, had first been scouted 4 years ago by one of those explorers traveling solo in survey service. Everyone knew that the first in scouts were a weird breed, almost a mutation of Terran stock. Their reports were rife with strange observations. So an alarming one concerning Circe, a yellow sun, such as Sol, and her 3 planets were not so rare, which, the world nearest in orbit to Circe, was too hot for human occupancy without drastic and too costly world changing. Wizard, the third out from the sun, was mostly bare rock and highly poisonous water. But Warlock, swinging through space between 2 forbidding neighbors, seemed to be just what the settlement board ordered. Then the survey scout, even in the cocoon safety of his well-armed ship, began to dream. And from those dreams a horror of the apparently empty world developed until he fled the planet to preserve his sanity. There had been a second visit to Warlock in check. Worlds so well adapted to human emigration could not be lightly thrown away. And this time, there was a negative report. No trace of dreams, no registration of any outside influence on the delicate and complicated equipment the ship carried. So the survey team had been dispatched to prepare for the coming of the first pioneers, and none of them had dreamed either. At least, no more than the ordinary dreams all men accepted. Only there were those who pointed out that the seasons had changed between the first and second visits to Warlock. That first scout had planeted in summer. His successors had come in fall and winter. They argued that the final release of the world for settlement should not be given until the full year on Warlock had been sampled. But the pressure of emigrant control had forced their hands. That, and the fear of just what had eventually happened, an attack from the Throgs. So they had speeded up the process of declaring Warlock open. Only Ragnar Thorvald had protested that decision up to the last and had gone back to headquarters on the supply ship a month ago to make a last appeal for a more careful study. Shan stopped brushing the sand from the tough fabric above his knee. Ragnar Thorvald. He remembered back to the port landing apron on another world, remembered with the sense of loss he could not define. That had been about the second biggest day of his short life. The biggest had come earlier, when they had actually allowed him to sign on for survey duty. He had tumbled off the cross-continent cargo carrier, his kit, a very meager kit, slung over his thin shoulder, a hot eagerness expanding inside him until he thought that he could not continue to throttle down that wild happiness. There was a waiting starship, and he, Shan Lanty from the dumps of Tyr, without any influence or schooling, was going to blast off in her, wearing the brown-green uniform of survey. Then he had hesitated uncertainly, had not quite dared cross the few feet of apron lying between him and that compact group wearing the same uniform, with a slight difference, that of service bars and completion badges and rank insignia, with the unconscious self-assurance of men who had done this many times before. But after a moment, that whole group had become his own shy appraisal, just a background for one man. Shan had never before known in his pinched and limited childhood, his lost boyhood, anyone who aroused in him hero worship. And he could not have put a name to the new emotion that added so suddenly to his burning desire to make good, not only to hold the small niche in survey which had already so painfully achieved, but to climb until he could stand so in such a group talking easily to that tall man, his uncovered head bronze yellow in the sunlight, his cool gray eyes pale in his brown face. Not that any of those wild dreams born in that minute or two had been realized in the ensuing months. Probably those dreams had always been as wild as the ones reported by the first scout on Warlock. Shan grinned wryly now at the short period of childish hope and half-confidence that he could do big things. Only one Thorvald had ever noticed Shan's existence in the survey camp, and that had been Garth. Garth Thorvald, a far less impressive, one could say smudged, copy of his brother. Swaggering with an arrogance Ragnar never showed, Garth was a cadet on his first mission, intent upon making Shan realize the unbridgeable gulf between a labor hand and an officer-to-be. He had appeared to know, right from their first meeting, just how to make Shan's life a misery. Now, in this slit of valley well away from the domes, Shan's fists balled. He pounded them against the earth in a way he had so often hoped to plant them on Garth's smoothly handsome face, his well-muscled body. One didn't survive the dumps of Tyr without learning how to use fists and boots and a list of tricks they didn't teach in any academy. He had always been sure that he could take Garth if they mixed it up, but if he had loosed the tight rein he had kept on his temper and offered that challenge, he would have lost his chance with Survey. Garth had proved himself able to talk his way out of any scrape, even minor derelictions of duty, and he far outranked Shan. The laborer from Tyr had had to swallow all that the other could dish out, and hoped that on his next assignment he would not be a member of young Thorvald's team. Though, because of Garth Thorvald, Shan's toll of black record marks had mounted dangerously high, and each day the chance for any more duty tours had grown dimmer. Shan laughed, and the sound was ugly. That was one thing he didn't have to worry about any longer. There would be no other assignments for him. The Throgs had seen to that. And Garth? Well, there would never be a showdown between them now. He stood up. The Throg ship had disappeared. They could push on. He found a break in the cliff wall, which was climbable, and he coaxed the wolverines after him. When they stood on the heights from which the falls tumbled, Taggy and Togi rubbed against him, cried for his attention. They, too, appeared to need the reassurance they got from contact with him, for they were also fugitives on this alien world, the only representatives of their kind. Since he did not have any definite goal in view, Shan continued to be guided by the stream, following its wanderings across a plateau. The sun was warm, so he carried his jacket slung across one shoulder. Taggy and Togi ranged ahead, twice catching skitterers, which they devoured voraciously. The shadow on a sun-baked rock sent the Terran skidding for cover until he saw that it was cast by one of the questing falcons from the upper peaks. But that shook his confidence, so he again sought cover, ashamed at his own carelessness. In the late afternoon he reached the far end of the plateau, faced a climb to peaks which still bore cones of snow, now tinted in a soft peach by the sun. Shan studied that possible path and distrusted his own powers to take it without proper equipment or supplies. He must turn either north or south, though he would then have to abandon a sure water supply in the stream. Tonight he would camp where he was. He had not realized how tired he was until he found a likely half-cave in the mountain wall and crawled in. There was too much danger and fire here. He would have to do without that first kind of comfort. I have read The Hobbit, yes. I've read less than 10 books, and The Hobbit is in 4 out of the 10 of them. Yeah. Luckily, the wolverines squeezed in beside him to fill the hole. With their warm furred bodies sandwiching him, Shan dozed, awoke, and dozed again, listening to night sounds, the screams, cries, hunting calls of the warlock wilds. Now and again, one of the wolverines whined and moved uneasily. Fingers of sun picked at Shan through a shaft among the rocks, striking his eyes. He moved, blinked blearily awake, unable for the first few seconds to understand why the smooth plasta wall of his bunk had become rough red stone. Then he remembered. He was alone, and he threw himself frantically out of the cave, afraid the wolverines had wandered off. Only both animals were busy clawing under a boulder with a steady persistence which argued there was a purpose behind that effort. A sharp sting on the back of one hand made that purpose only too clear to Shan, and he retreated hurriedly from the vicinity of the excavation. They had found an earth wasp's burrow and were hunting grubs, naturally arousing the rightful inhabitants to bitter resentment. Shan faced the problem of his own breakfast. He had had the immunity shots given to all members of the team, and he had eaten game brought in by exploring parties and labeled safe. But how long could he keep the varieties of native food he knew was uncertain? Sooner or later he must experiment for himself. Already he drank the stream water without the aid of purifiers, and so far there had been no ill results from that necessary recklessness. Now the stream suggested fish. But instead he chanced upon another water inhabitant which had crawled up on land for some obscure purpose of its own. It was a sluggish, scaled thing, an easy victim to his club. With thin, weak legs, it could project at will from a finned and armor-plated body. Shan offered the head and guts to Togi, who had abandoned the wasp nest. She sniffed in careful investigation and then gulped. Shan built a small fire and seared the firm, greenish flesh. The taste was flat, lacking salt, but the food eased his emptiness. Unheartened, he started south, hoping to find water sometime during the morning. By noon, he had his optimism justified with the discovery of a spring, and the wolverines had brought down a slender-legged animal whose coat was close in shade to the dusky purple of the vegetation. Smaller than a Terran deer, its head bore, not horns, but a ridge of stiffened hair rising in a point some 12 inches about the skull dome. Shan haggled off some ragged steaks while the wolverines feasted in earnest, carefully burying their head afterward. It was when Shan knelt by the spring pool to wash that he caught the clamor of the clack-clacks. He had seen or heard nothing of the flyers since he had left the lake valley, but from the noise now rising in an ear-splitting volume, he thought there was a sizable colony nearby, and that the inhabitants were thoroughly aroused. He crept on his hands and knees to nearby brush cover, heading towards the source of that outburst. If the clacks were announcing a Throg scouting party, he wanted to know it. Lying flat, with branches forming a screen over him, the Terran gazed out on a stretch of grassland, which sloped at a fairly steep angle to the south, and which must lead to a portion of countryside well below the level he was now traversing. The clack-clacks were skimming back and forth, shrieking their staccato war cries. Following the erratic dashes of their flight formation, Shan decided that whatever they rallied against was on the lower level, out of his sight from that point. Should he simply withdraw, since the disturbance was not near him? Prudence dictated that. Yet, still, he hesitated. He had no desire to travel north, or to try and scale the mountains. No, south was the best path, and he should be very sure that route was closed before he retreated. Since any additional fuss the clack-clacks might make on sighting, he would be undistinguished in their now general clamor. The Terran crawled on to where tall grass provided a screen at the top of the slope. There he stopped short, his hands digging into the earth in sudden braking action. Below, the ground steamed from a rocket flare-back, grasses burned away from the fins of a small scout ship. But even as Shan rose to one knee, his shout of welcome choked in his throat. One of those fins sank, canting the ship crookedly, preventing any new takeoff. And over the crown of a low hill to the west swung the ominous black plate of a Throg flyer. The Throg ship came up in a burst of speed, and Shan waited tensely for some counter move from the scout.
Warrior who has ever
Oh
lived!
my god.
Ad.
Wait, I'm not subbed? Need to fix that. Moog, it has truly been such a delight to get to spend time with you and this wonderful community. Just wish I had been able to sooner.
Thank you so much for the sub. Oh my gosh. An ad? We must rectify this. Thank you so, so much, Noodles. It's always such a joy to have you here and be a part of this community. Too excited. Lost my spot. There we go. Those small, speedy Terran ships were prudently provided with weapons triply deadly in proportion to their size. He was sure that the Terran ship could hold its own against the Throg, even eliminate the enemy. Oh my gosh. Forgiven. But there was no fire from the slanting pencil of the scout. The Throg circled warily, obviously expecting a trap. Twice it darted back in the direction from which it had come. As it returned from its second retreat, another of its kind showed, a black coin dot against the amber of the sky. Shan felt sick inside. Now the Terran scout had lost an advantage, and perhaps all hope. The Throgs could box the other in, cut the downed ship to pieces with their energy beams. He wanted to crawl away and not witness this last disaster for his kind, but some stubborn core of will kept him where he was. The Throgs began to circle, while beneath them the flock of clack-clacks screamed and dived at the slanting nose of the Terran ship. Then that same slashing energy he had watched quarter the camp snapped from the far plate across the stricken scout. The man who had piloted her, if not dead already, which might account for the lack of defense, must have fallen victim to that. But the Throg was going to make very sure. The second flyer halted, remaining poised long enough to unleash a second bolt, dazzling any watching eyes and broadcasting a vibration to make Shan's skin crawl when the last faint ripple reached his lookout post. What happened then the overconfident Throg was not prepared to take. Shan cried out, burying his face on his arm, as pinwheels of scarlet light blotted out normal sight. There was an explosion, a deafening blast. He cowered, blind, unable to hear. Then, rubbing at his eyes, he tried to see what had happened. Through watery blurs he'd made out the Throg ship, not swinging now in serene indifference to Warlock's gravity, but whirling end over end across the sky as might a leaf tossed in a gust of wind. Its rim caught against a rust-red cliff. It rebounded and crumpled. Then it came down, smashing perhaps half a mile away from the smoking crater in which lay the mangled wreckage of the Terran ship. The disabled scout pilot must have played a last desperate game, making of his ship bait for a trap. The Terran had taken one Throg with him. Shan rubbed again at his eyes, just barely able to catch a glimpse of the second ship flashing away westward. Perhaps it was only his impaired sight, but it appeared to him that the Throg followed an erratic path, either as if the pilot feared to be caught by a second shot, or because that ship had also suffered some injury. Acid smoke wreathed up from the valley, making Shan retch and cough. There could be no survivor from the Terran scout, and he did not believe that any Throg had lived to crawl free of the crumpled plate. But there would be other beetles swarming here soon. They would not dare to leave the scene unsearched. He wondered about that scout. Had the pilot been aiming for the survey camp? The absence of any rider beam from there warning him off so that he made the detour which brought him here? Or had the Throgs tried to blast the Terran ship in the upper atmosphere, crippling it, making this a forced landing? But at least this battle had cost the Throgs, settling a small portion of the Terran debt for the lost camp. The length of time between Shan's sighting of the grounded ship and the attack of the Throgs had been so short that he had not really developed any strong hope of rescue to be destroyed by the end of the crippled ship. On the other hand, seeing the Throgs take a beating had exploded his subconscious acceptance of their authority. He might not have even the resources of a damaged scout to his command, but he did have Togi, and his own brain. Since he was fated to permanent exile on Warlock, there might just be some way to make the beetles pay for that. He licked his lips. Real action against the aliens would take a lot of planning. Shan would have to know more about what made a Throg, more than all the wild stories he had heard over the years. There had to be some way a Terran could move effectively against a beetle. And he had a lot of time, maybe the rest of his life, to work out a few answers. That Throg ship lying wrecked at the foot of the cliff. Perhaps he could do a little investigating before any rescue squad arrived. Shan decided such a move was worth the try and whistled to the Wolverines. End of chapter 2. All right. I am enjoying this. I like survivalist stories though. I like being lost. Well, I don't like being lost, but I like reading about people being lost and like using their resources and being like clever, overly clever than they've ever had to be before. I think it's cool. Such a breath of fresh air after the last book. Yeah. Yeah. Not as uneasy. It's not a constant unease. Seeming good. Yeah, there's just something about first contact science fiction and lost in space science fiction. Or not necessarily lost, or stranded. There we go. Lost/stranded. I'm liking it so far. Where are the space babes at, though? Hey, maybe there's some space babe throgs. You never know. What is it you like about these scenarios? Well, I know that I wouldn't survive. So it's actually kind of cool that Shan is the like least useful one. Um, I just like seeing people come out of devastating situations that seem impossible. It's both. I really like good world building, and I also really like character development. Um, and there has to be a balance in these types of books anyway for both of those. Because if you have too much world building, then it's going to be really, really slow, and you're not really going to care about the action that's happening. If you have too heavily characters or character driven, then it falls into that same thing. Like, yeah, you're going to care about the characters, but like what's the action? Like what is the scare, the need, the catalyst to get them to move? So like we have a clear threat, and we also have a clear character that will be developing in probably a lot of different ways. And also, I love that there's two Wolverines here, two little Wolverine buddies. My favorite book that is like that. Ooh, that's hard. Or movie. Um, I mean, classics. This is a classic sci-fi answer. I love Alien, the movie Alien. I love it so much. I really like Jurassic Park. The book is much more science focused than the movie. I've read and watched both. I really liked The Martian by Andy Weir. I 1000% agree with you, Noodles. Alien is greater than Aliens, yes. And I don't think I've seen the third one. I think I've only seen Alien and Aliens. But yeah, survival stuff. I also really like The Martian as well. The book is better than the movie, of course, as what every reader has ever said since the beginning of time. But it's just real cool. And I like Alien better than the one that came out 2 years ago, Project Hail Mary. Oh, no, no, no. Never apologize for questions. It's always good. Yeah, for sure. All right, Noodles, what's your question? You gave up on the Martian first page. Yeah, there's a lot of those. I think the second word. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It is, yeah, that's pretty much the tone. I was gonna say it changes, but it doesn't really. Oh, why do you think people so often say that the book is better? Movies are bad. Hmm. No, I wouldn't say that movies are bad or inferior. There's been several movies that I've seen that I didn't even know that there was a book that I really enjoyed. And of course, now that I say that, I can't give you an example. But I think that, oh, I can give you an example of a movie that I liked better than the book, and that is The Princess Bride. But generally, I would say that books are better because you get the internal monologue or thoughts of people that you just that don't translate very well to a screen. Ready Player One is much better and far less cringe than the book. Do not read Ready Player Two. Don't do it. And you agree about The Princess Bride, yeah. Yeah, yeah. And it is, and it's not always the case where, yeah, the film is bad or not good or the book is just inherently better. Um, there are, like, I really liked Dune and I really liked the book Dune. I haven't seen the first one, like the cult classic one. I haven't seen that one. But yeah, that is an interesting one, and I think I need to like think on it a little bit. I think it depends on if the director and the writers have an understanding and appreciation for the work or what makes the book so beloved or why it is like working for people. And I think sometimes that doesn't come off great. Hmm. And no, that's not a good example. I was gonna say that like the um Lord of the Rings movies, the Peter Jackson ones, are really good. And they are. Like they are, hands down. They're really good. They're amazing. And the books, the materials that they had to work with are also like really good. They're super, super dense. They have a lot of world building and lore and everything thrown into it, but they do such a good job with like taking out the important story bits and the lore without overwhelming people because a huge range of people really enjoy those movies. So you have that example. And then you have the example of Rings of Power, which, yes, it doesn't have like an exact book. Like the Silmarillion isn't like it's not exact. And you don't have an exact roadmap for it. But different scenario, different type of media. You prefer the 1994 Little Women to the book. Yeah. Did I watch that one? I don't remember. We read the book a couple of months ago. Yes. The reason you really dislike film adaptation of The Watchmen is many pot director has a fundamental misunderstanding of the subject matter. The biggest example of the complete failure of adapting Rorschach. Interesting, interesting. Hmm. See, I haven't watched Watchmen in a really long time, and I mean, I remember the graphic novel very vividly, but I don't think I've watched it in a really long time. I know that there's a couple cool details that are thrown into the movie, but yeah, like I wouldn't be able to speak on that too much. I believe you. I believe you, Noodles. Falcor, that was before your time. I think we read it. Man, I don't even know. I could look it up. In the same way that a person who watches Fight Club and thinks Tyler Durden is a great guy. That's a good analogy. That's a good analogy. That's pretty good. Yeah, yeah. Okay, I can see that. I can see that. All right. Let's get back to chapter 3. Very interesting conversation though. Love it. I'll have to think about it. And yeah, I just don't remember that much of the movie, I guess. All right, chapter 3. To close ranks. Shan made his way at an angle to avoid the smoking pit cradling the wreckage of the Terran ship. There were no signs of life about the Throg plate as he approached. A quarter of its bulk was telescoped back into the rest, and surely none of the aliens could have survived such a smash. Tough as they were reputed to be with those horny carapaces serving them in place of more vulnerable human skin. He sniffed. There was a nauseous odor heavy on the morning air, one which would make a lasting impression on any human nose. The port door in the black ship stood open, perhaps having burst in the impact against the cliff. Shan had almost reached it with a crackle of chain lightning beat across the ground before him, turning the edge of the buckled entrance panel red. Shan dropped to the ground, drawing his stunner, knowing at the same time that such a weapon was about as much use in meeting a blaster as a straw wand would be to ward off a blazing coal. A chill numbness held him as he waited for a second blast to char the flesh between his shoulders. So there had been a Throg survivor, after all. But as moments passed and the Throg did not move in to make an easy kill, Shan collected his wits. Only one shot. Was the beetle injured? Unable to make sure of even an almost defenseless prey? The Throgs seldom took prisoners. When they did... The Terran's lips tightened. He worked his hand under his prone body, feeling for the hilt of his knife. With that, he could speedily remove himself from the status of Throg prisoner, and he would do it gladly if there was no hope of escape. Had there been only one charge left in that blaster? Shan could make half a dozen guesses as to why the other had made no move, but that shot had come from behind him, and he dared not turn his head or otherwise make an effort to see what the other might be doing. Was it only his imagination, or had that stench grown stronger during the last few seconds? Could the Throg be creeping up on him? Shan strained his ears, trying to catch some sound he could interpret. The few clack-clacks that had survived the blast about the ship were shrieking overhead, and Shan made one attempt at counterattack. He whistled the Wolverine's call. The pair had not been too willing to follow him down into the valley, and they had avoided the crater at a very wide circle. But if they would obey him now, he just might have a chance. There. That had been a sound, and the smell was stronger. The Throg must be coming to him. Again Shan whistled, holding in his mind his hatred for the beetle, the need for finishing off that alien. If the animals could pick either thoughts or emotions out of their human companion, this was the time for him to give those unspoken half-orders across. Shan slammed his hand hard against the ground, sent his body rolling, his stunner up and ready. And now he could see that grotesque thing, swaying weakly back and forth on its thin legs, yet holding a blaster, bringing that weapon up to center it on him. The Throg was hunched over, and perhaps to Taggy presented the outline of some four-footed creature to be hunted, for the wolverine male sprang for the horn-shelled shoulders. Under that impact, that Throg sagged forward. But Taggy, outraged at the nature of creature he had attacked, squalled and retreated. Shan had had his precious seconds of distraction. He fired, the core of the stun beam striking full into the flat dish of the alien's face. That bolt, which would have shocked a mammal into insensibility, only slowed the Throg. Shan rolled again, gaining a temporary cover behind the wrecked ship. He squirmed under metal hot enough to scorch his jacket and saw the reflection of a second blaster shot which had been fired seconds late. Now the Throg had him tied down, but to get at the Terran the alien would have to show himself, and Shan had one chance in 50, which was better than that of 3 minutes ago, when the odds had been set at 1 in 100. He knew that he could not press the wolverines in again. Taggy's distaste was too manifest. Shan had been lucky that the animal had made one abortive attack. Perhaps the Terran's escape and Taggy's action had made the alien reckless. Shan had no clue to the thinking process of the non-human, but now the Throg staggered around the end of the plate, his digits, which were closer to claws than fingers, fumbling with his weapon. The Terran snapped another shot from his stunner, hoping to slow the enemy down, but he was trapped. If he turned to climb the cliff at his back, the beetle could easily pick him off. A rock hurtled from the heights above, striking with deadly accuracy on the domed, hairless head of the Throg. His armored body crashed forward, struck against the ship, and rebounded to the ground. Shan darted forward to seize the blaster, kicking loose the claws which still grasped it, before he flattened back to the cliff, the strange weapon over his arm, his heart beating wildly. That rock had not bounded down the mountainside by chance. It had been hurled with intent and aimed carefully at its target, and no Throg would kill one of his own fellows. Or would he? Suppose order had been issued to take a Terran prisoner and the Throg by the ship had disobeyed. Then, why a rock, and not a blaster bolt? Shan edged along up till the... We're going to start that sentence over. Shan edged along until the upslanted, broken side of the Throg flyer provided him with protection from any overhead attack. Under that shelter, he waited for the next move from his unknown rescuer. The clack-clacks wheeled closer to earth. One lit boldly on the carapace of the inert Throg, shuffling ungainly along that horny ridge. Cradling the blaster, the Terran continued to wait. His patience was rewarded when that investigating clack-clack took off, uttering an enraged snap or two. Oh, hey, honey lemon. Enjoy your dark corner. He heard what might be the scrape of boots across rock, but that might also have come from horny skin meeting stone. Then the other must have lost his footing not too far above. Accompanied by a miniature landslide of stones and earth, a figure slid down several yards away. Shan waited in a half-crouch, his looted blaster covering the man now getting to his feet. There was no mistaking the familiar uniform, or even the man. How Ragnar Thorvald had reached that particular spot on Warlock, or why, Shan could not know. But that he was there was no denying. Shan hurried forward. It had been when he caught his first sight of Thorvald that he realized just how deep his unacknowledged loneliness had been. There were 2 Terrans on Warlock now, and he did not need to know why. But Thorvald was staring back at him with the blankness of non-recognition. "Who are you?" The demand held something close to suspicion. That note in the other's voice wiped away a measure of Shan's confidence. threatened something which had flowered in him since he had struck into the wilderness on his own. 3 words had reduced him again to Lanty, unskilled laborer. Lanty, I'm from the camp? Thorvald's eagerness was plain as in his next question. How many of you got away? Where are the rest? He gazed past Shan up the plateau slope as if he expected to see the personnel of the camp sprout out of the cloak of grass along the verge. Just me and the Wolverines, Shan answered in a colorless voice. He cradled the blaster on his hip, turned a little away from the officer. You and the Wolverines? Thorvald was plainly startled. But where? How? The Throgs hit very early yesterday morning. They caught the rest in camp. The Wolverines had escaped from their cage, and I was out hunting them. He told his story badly. Nope, he told it baldly. I mean, maybe it was badly as well. You're sure about the rest? Thorvald had a thin steel of rage edging his voice. Almost, Shan thought, as if he could turn that blade of rage against one Shan Lanty for being yet alive when more important men had not survived. I saw the attack from an upper ridge, the younger man said, having been put on the defensive. Yet he had a right to be alive, hadn't he? Or did Thorvald believe that he should have gone running down to meet the beetles with his useless stunner? They used energy beams. Didn't land until it was all over. I knew there was something wrong when the camp didn't answer our enter atmosphere signal, Thorvald said absently. Then one of those platers jumped on us, breaking orbit, and my pilot was killed. When we set down on the automatics here, I had just time to rig a surprise for any attackers before I took to the hills. The blast got one of them, Shan pointed out. Yes, they'd nicked the booster rocket. She wouldn't climb again, but they'll be back here to pick over the remains. Shan looked at the dead Throg. Thanks for taking a hand. His tone was as chill as the others this time. I'm heading south. And, he added silently, I intend to keep on that way. The Throg attack had dissolved the pattern of the survey team. He didn't owe Thorvald any allegiance, and he had been successfully on his own here since the camp had been overrun. South, Thorvald repeated. Well, that's as good as any direction, right now. But they were not united. Shan found the Wolverines and patiently coaxed and wheedled them into coming with him over a circuitous route which kept them away from both ships. Thorvald went up the cliff, swung down again, a supply bag slung over one shoulder. He stood watching as Shan brought the animals in. Then Thorvald's arm swept out, his fingers closely, possessively about the barrel of the blaster. Shan's own hold on the weapon tightened, and the force of the other's pull dragged him partly round. Let's have that. Why? Shan supposed that because it had been the other's well-aimed rock which had put the Throg out of commission permanently, the officer was going to claim their only spoils of war as personal booty, and a hot resentment flowered in the younger man. Why, we don't take that away from here. Thorvald made the weapon his with a quick twist. To Shan's utter astonishment, the survey officer walked back to kneel beside the dead Throg. He worked the grip of the blaster under the alien's lax claws and inspected the result with the care of one arranging a special and highly important display. Shan's protest became vocal. We'll need that. It'll do us far more good right where it is. Thorvald paused, and then added with impatience, roughening his voice as if he disliked the need for making any explanations. There's no reason for us to advertise our being alive. If the Throgs found a missing blaster, they'd start thinking and looking around. I want to have a breathing spell before I have to play quarry in one of their hunts. Put that way, his actions did make sense. But Shan regretted the loss of an arm so superior to their own weapons. Now they could not loot the plate ship either. In silence, he turned and started to trudge southward, without warning for Thorvald to catch up with him. Without waiting for Thorvald to catch up to him. Once away from the blasted area, the Wolverines ranged ahead at their clumsy gallop, which covered ground at a surprising rate of speed. Shan knew that their curiosity made them scouts surpassing any human, and that the men who followed would have ample warning of any danger to come. Without reference to his silent trail companion, he sent the animals toward another strip of woodland, which would give them cover against the coming of any Throg flyer. As the hours advanced, he began to cast about for a proper night camp. The woods ought to give them a usable site. "This is a waterwood," Thorvald said, breaking the silence for the first time since they had left the wrecks. Shan knew that the other had knowledge, not only of the general countryside, but of exploring techniques which he himself did not possess, but to be reminded of that fact was an irritant rather than a reassurance. Without answering, the younger man bored on to locate the water promised. The Wolverines found the small lake first, and were splashing along its shore when the Terrans caught up. Thorvald went to work, but to Shan's surprise he did not unstrap the force-blade axe at his belt. Bending over a sapling, he pounded away with a stone at the green wood a few inches above the root line until he was able to break through the slender trunk. Shan drew his own knife and bent to tackle another treelet when Thorvald stopped him with an order. "Use a stone on that, the way I did." Shan could see no reason for such a laborious process. If Thorvald did not want to use his axe, that was no reason that Shan could not put his heavy belt knife to work. He hesitated, ready to set the blade to the outer bark of the tree. Again. Oh, nope. "Look." Again, that impatient edge in the officer's tone, the need for explanation seeming to come very hard to the other. "Sooner or later, the Throgs might just trace us here and find this camp. If so, they are not going to discover any traces to label us Terran." "But who else could we be?" protested Shan. "There is no native race on Warlock." Thorvald tossed his improvised stone axe from hand to hand. "But do Throgs know that?" The implications, the possibilities, in that idea struck home to Shan. Now he began to understand what Thorvald might be planning. "Now there is going to be a native race." Shan made a statement instead of a question, and saw that the other was watching him with a new intentness, as if he had at last been recognized as a person instead of rank and file, and very low rank at that. Survey personnel. "There is going to be a native race," Thorvald affirmed. Shan resheathed his knife and went to search the pond beach for a suitable stone to use in its place. Even so, he made harder work of the clumsy chopping than Thorvald had. He worried at one sapling after another until his hands were skinned and his breath came in painful gusts from under aching ribs. Thorvald had gone on to another task, ripping the end of a long, tough vine from just under the powdery surface of the thick leaf masses falling in other years. With this, the officer lashed together the tops of the poles, having planted their splintered butts in the ground, so that he achieved a crudely conical erection. Leafy branches were woven back and forth through this framework, and with an entrance through which one might crawl on hands and knees, left facing the lakeside. Oh my. The shelter they completed was compact and efficient, but totally unlike anything Shan had ever seen before, certainly far removed from the domes of the camp. He said so, nursing his raw hands. "An old form," Thorvald replied, "native to a primitive race on Terra. Certainly, the beetles haven't come across its like before." "Are we going to stay here? Otherwise it is pretty heavy work for one night's lodging." Thorvald tested the shelter with a sharp shake. The matted leaves whispered, but the framework held. "Stage dressing," No, we won't linger here, but it's evidence to support our play. Even a Throg isn't dense enough to believe that natives would make a cross-country trip without leaving evidence of their passing. Shan sat down with a sigh he made no effort to suppress. He had a vision of Thorvald traveling southward, methodically erecting these huts here and there to confound Throgs who might not ever chance upon them. But already the survey officer was busy with a new problem. We need weapons. We have our stunners, a forced axe, and our knives, Shan pointed out. He did not add, as he would have liked, that they could have had a blaster. Native weapons, Thorvald countered with his usual snap. He went back to the beach and crawled about there, choosing and rejecting stones picked out of the gravel. Shan scooped out a small pit just before their hut and set about the making of a pocket-sized fire. He was hungry and looked longingly now and again to the supply bag Thorvald had brought with him. Dared he rummage in that for rations? Surely the other would be carrying concentrates. Who taught you how to make a fire that way? Thorvald was back from the pond, a selection of round stones about the size of his fist resting between his chest and his forearm. It's regulation, isn't it? Shan countered defensively. It's regulation, Thorvald agreed. He set down his stones in a row and then tossed the supply bag over to his companion. Too late to hunt tonight, but we'll have to go easy on those rations until we get more. Where did Thorvald know of some supply cache they could raid? From the Throgs, the other answered matter-of-factly. But they don't eat our kind of food. All the more reason for them to leave the camps supplied untouched. The camp? For the first time, Thorvald's lips curved in a shadow smile, which was neither joyous nor warming. A native raid on an invader's camp. What could be more natural? And we'd better make it soon. But how can we? To Shan, what the other proposed was sheer madness. There was once an ancient service corps on Terra, Thorvald answered, which had a motto something like this: the improbable we do at once, the impossible takes a little longer. What did you think we were going to do? Sulk around here in the bush and let the Throgs claim Warlock for one of their pirate bases without opposition? Since that was the only future Shan had visualized, he was ready enough to admit the truth. Only some shade of tone in the officer's voice kept him from saying so aloud. End of chapter 3. Alright, so we have a survivor. His good old enemies to friends. How did I pick this one? I was looking for a female science fiction writer, and those are hard to find to easily access. And even this one took a little bit to figure out that Andre Norton was just a pen name. So yeah, that's why I picked it. Because I wanted science fiction, but also female for Women's History Month. It is published. Oh, is it still published? That's a good question. It was originally published in 1960, so I would assume so. Let me double check. Let's see. Storm of Warlock. Mm-hmm. Yep, still published under Andre, which is interesting. It is on Amazon. Everything's on Amazon. Ever heard of Rebecca Roanhorse? I have not. That sounds amazing. Native American woman sci-fi writer. Okay, hold on. Let me write this down because I know that I say that I'm gonna remember. I'm not gonna remember if I don't write it down. Oh gosh. I have a little notebook here. It's a much more lame cover on Amazon. I do look for more of the fun ones, but also this cover is a direct cover of what the edition is that I'm reading. Okay, Rebecca. What was that name? Roan Horse. All right. So my immediate suspicion, I'm assuming the only, yes, yes. Mm, you are 1000% correct, Falcor. Because she has written other things under Alice, I think, unless I misread that. Um, yeah. So my initial thought when we saw Thorvald is that is that Thorvald is not actually Thorvald, like alien possession. But now I don't think that. After like a couple conversations, I was like, no, that's not what happened. He's just there. He just survived by circumstance. Yeah, it is interesting that some pen names stick while others don't, like Wuthering Heights. That's a great example. Yeah, I and I wish I could tell you. I have no idea. But that would be an interesting thing to look into as to why. My first Photoshop tutorial. Okay, let's see here. I think we have time for 2 chapters. We'll do 2 more chapters. Let's see. Oopsie, oopsie poopsie. Yeah, we do. We have time for 2 more chapters. Perfectly timed to add. Excellent. All right. The worm is on a treadmill. Aren't we all? Oh, okay. Captain Hardship, I didn't realize that Black Sun was written by Roan Horse. Okay, that's really cool. Because I've seen that cover and that just didn't make that connection. I'm glad that you brought that up. Because yes, that is an interesting. I th- I don't remember the synopsis, but I remember it being interesting and like trying to keep it on my radar. So that's cool. Very good, very good. Okay. Boop, 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 boop. Found a Walla copy of Narnia from the Scholastic. Amazing. That sounds so amazing. That's wonderful. What a good find. What a great find. Treasures. All right. Roan Horse has some. Oh, in her own series with a Native American female protagonist. I am just. I feel like I know nothing now. I need to. I clearly need to read her. Okay. I need to read her. I'm gonna underline my note over here. Thank you, Star, for bringing it to my attention. Okay, I'm doing an exclamation point because I'm writing with my left hand and I would accidentally cross it off if I was trying to underline it. All right. Thank you, thank you. Chapter 4. Sortie. 5 days later, they came up from the south so that this time Shan's view of the Terran camp was from a different angle. At first sight, there had been little change in the general scene. He wondered if the aliens were using the Terran dome shelters themselves. Even in the twilight, it was easy to pick out such landmarks as the calm dome, with the shaft of a broadcaster spearing from its top and the greater bulk of the supply warehouse. Two of their small flyers down on the landing field. Thorvald materialized from the shadow, his voice a thread of whisper. By Shan's side, the Wolverines were moving restlessly. Since Taggy's attack on the Throg, neither beast would venture near any site where they could scent the aliens. This was the nearest point to which the men could urge either animal, which was a disappointment, for the Wolverines would have been an excellent addition to the surprise sortie they were planned for tonight, halving the danger for the men. Shan ran his fingers across the coarse fur on the animal's shoulders, exerting a light pressure to signal them to wait. But he was not sure of their obedience. The foray was a crazy idea, and Shan wondered again why he had agreed to it. Yet he had gone along with Thorvald, even suggested a few modifications and additions to his own, such as the contents of the crude leaf sack now resting between his knees. Thorvald flitted away, seeking his own post to the west. Shan was still waiting for the other's signal when there arose from the camp a sound to chill the flesh of any listener. A wail, which could not have come from the throat of any normal living thing, intelligent being or animal. Ululating in ear-torturing intensity, the cry sank to a faint, ominous echo of itself, to waver up the scale again. The Wolverines went mad. Shan had witnessed their quick kills in the wilds, but this stark ferocity of spitting, howling rage was new. They answered that challenge from the camp, streaking out from under his hands. Yet both animals skidded to a stop before they passed the first dome and were lost in the gloom. A spark glowed for an instant to his right. Thorvald was ready to go, so Shan had no time to try and recall the animals. He fumbled for those balls of soaked moss in his leaf bag. The chemical smell from them blotted out that alien mustiness which the wind brought from the campsite. Shan readied the first sopping mess in his sling, snapped his fire sparker at it, and had the ball awhirl for a toss almost in one continuous movement. The moss burst into fire as it curved out and fell. To a witness, it might have seemed that a missile materialized out of the air, the effect being better than Shan had hoped. A second ball for the sling. Spark. Out. Down. The first had smashed on the ground near the dome of the comm station, the force of impact flattening it into a round splatter of now fiercely burning material, and his second, carefully aimed, lit 2 feet beyond. Another wail tearing at the nerves. Shan made a third throw, a fourth. He had an audience now. In the light of those pools of fire, the Throgs were scuttling back and forth, their hunched bodies casting weird shadows on the dome walls. They were making efforts to douse the fires, but Shan knew from careful experimentation that once ignited, the stuff he had skimmed from the lip of one of the hot springs would go on burning as long as a fraction of its viscid substance remained unconsumed. Now Thorvald had gone into action. A Throg suddenly halted, struggled frantically, and toppled over into the edge of a fire splotch, legs looped together by the coils of the curious weapon Thorvald had put together on their first night of partnership. 3 round stones of comparable weight had each been fastened at the end of a vine cord, and those cords united at a center point. Thorvald had demonstrated the effectiveness of his creation by bringing down one of the small deer of the grasslands, an animal normally fleet enough to feel safe from both human and animal pursuit. And those weighted ropes now trapped the Throg with the same efficiency. Having shot his last fireball, Shan ran swiftly to take up a new position, downgrade, and to the east of the domes. Here he put into action another of the primitive weapons Thorvald had devised, a spear hurled with a throwing stick, giving it double range and twice as forceful penetration power. The spears themselves were hardly more than crudely shaped lengths of wood, their points charred in the fire. Perhaps these missiles could neither kill nor seriously wound, but more than one thudded home in a satisfactory fashion against the curving back carapace or the softer front parts of a Throg in a manner which certainly shook up and bruised the target. And one of Shan's victims went to the ground, to lie kicking in a way which suggested he had been more than just bruised. Fireballs. Spears. Thorvald had moved too, and now down into the somewhat frantic melee of the aroused camp fell a shower of slim, weighted reeds, each provided with a clay ball head. The majority of those balls broke on landing as the Terrans had intended. So, through the beetle smell of the aliens spread the acrid, throat-parching fumes of the hot spring water. Whether those fumes had the same effect upon Throg breathing apparatus as they did upon Terran, the attackers could not tell, but they hoped with such a bombardment would add to the general confusion. Shan began to space the hurling of his crude spears with more care, trying to place them with all the precision of aim he could muster. There was a limit to their amount of varied ammunition, although they had dedicated every waking moment of the past few days to manufacture and testing. Luckily, the enemy had none of their energy beams at the domes, and so far they made no move to lift their flyers for retaliation blasts. But the Throgs were pulling themselves into order. Blaster fire cut the dusk. Most of the aliens were now flat on the ground, sending a creeping line of fire into the perimeter of the camp area. A dark form moved between Shan and the nearest patch of burning moss. Atkinson, hello! Welcome in, so glad to see you. How are you? Happy Thursday. Oh my gosh, do not apologize. Oh, I'm so sorry. I hope you're feeling better now, all recovered. The Terran raised a spear to the ready before he caught a whiff of the pungent scent emitted by a wolverine hot with battle rage. He whistled coaxingly. With the Throgs eager to blast any moving thing, the animals were in danger if they prowled about the scene. Oh, good. I'm glad. That blunt head moved. Shan caught the glint of eyes in a furred mask. It was either Taggy or his mate. Then a puff of mixed throng and chemical scent from the camp must have reached the wolverine. The animal coughed and fled westward, passing Shan. Had Thorvald had time and opportunity to make his planned raid on the supply dome? Time during such an embroilment was hard to measure, and Shan could not be sure. He began to count aloud, slowly, as they had agreed. When he reached 100, he would begin his retreat. On 200, he was to run for it. His goal, the river, a half-mile from the camp. The stream would take the fugitives to the sea where fjords cut the coastline into a ragged fringe offering a wealth of hiding places. Throngs seldom explored any territory on foot. For them to venture into that maze would be putting themselves at the mercy of the Terrans they hunted, and their flyers could comb the air above such a rocky wilderness without result. Shan reached the count of 100. Twice a blaster bolt singed the ground within distance close enough to make him wince, but most of the fire carried well above his head. All of his spears were gone, save for one he had kept, hoping for a last good target. One of the Throgs, who appeared to be directing the fire of the others, was facing Shan's position, and on pure chance that he might knock out that leader, Shan chose him as his victim. The Terran had no illusions concerning his own marksmanship. The most he could hope for, he thought, was to have the primitive weapon thud home painfully on the other's armed hide. Perhaps, if he were very lucky, he could knock the other from his clawed feet. But that chance, which hovers over any battlefields, turned in Shan's favor. At just the right moment, the Throg stretched his head up from the usual hunched position, where the carapace extended over his wide shoulders to protect one of the alien's few vulnerable spots, the soft underside of his throat. And the fire-sharpened point of the spear went deep. Frogs were mute, or at least none of them had ever uttered a vocal sound to be reported by Terrans. This one did not cry out, but he staggered forward, forelimbs up, clawed digits pulling at the wooden pin transfixing his throat just under the mandible-equipped jaw, holding his head at an unnatural angle. Without seeming to notice the others of his kind, the Throg came on at a shambling run, straight at Shan, as if he could actually see through the dark and had marked down the Terran for personal vengeance. There was something so uncanny about that forward dash that Shan retreated. As his hand groped for the knife at his belt, his boot heel caught in a tangle of weed, and he struggled for balance. The wounded Throg, still pulling at the spear shaft protruding above the swelling barrel of his chest, pounded on. Shan sprawled backward and was caught in the elastic embrace of a bush, so he did not strike the ground. He fought the grip of prickly branches and kicked to gain solid earth under his feet. Then again he heard that piercing wail from the camp, as chilling as it had been the first time. Spurred by that, he won free. But he could not turn his back on the wounded Throg, keeping rather a sidewise retreat. Already the alien had reached the dark beyond the rim of the camp. His progress now was marked by the crashing through low brush. Two of the Throgs, back on the firing line, started up after their leader. Shan caught a whiff of their odor as the wounded alien advanced with the single-mindedness of a robot. It would be best to head for the river. Tall grass twisted about the Terran's legs as he began to run. In spite of the gloom, he hesitated to cross that open space. At night, Warlock's peculiar vegetation displayed a very alien attribute. 10, 20 varieties of grass, plant, and tree emitted a wan phosphorescence, varying in degrees, but affording each an aura of light. And the path before Shan now was dotted by splotches of that radiance, not as brilliant as the chemical-born flames the attackers had rekindled in the camp, but as quick to betray the unwary who passed within their dim circles. And there had never been any reason to believe that Throg powers of sight were less than human. There was perhaps some evidence to the contrary. Shan crouched, charting the clumps ahead for a zigzag course which would take him to at least momentary safety in the riverbed. Perhaps a mile downstream was the transport the Terrans had cobbled together no earlier than this afternoon, a raft Thorvald had professed to believe would support them to the sea which lay some 50 Terran miles to the west. But now he had to cover that mile. The Wolverines? Thorvald? There was one lure which might draw the animals onto the rendezvous. Taggy had brought down a deer just before they left the raft. Deer is in quotations. Probably because it's like a deer, but not quite. The Warlock's version of a deer. And instead of allowing both beasts to feast at leisure, Shan had lashed the carcass to the shaky platform of wood and brush, putting it out to swing in the current, though still moored to the bank. Yeah, deer. Just like Taco Bell used to have beef. Wolverines always cached that part of the kill which they did not consume at the first eating, usually burying it. He had hoped that to leave the carcass in such a way would draw both animals back to the raft when they were hungry, and they had not fed particularly well that day. Thorvald? Well, the survey officer had made it very plain during the past 5 days of what Shan had come to look upon as an uneasy partnership that he considered himself far abler to manage in the field, while he had grave doubts of Shan's efficiency in the direction of survival potential. The Terran started along the pattern of retreat he had laid out to the riverbed. His heart pounded as he ran, not because of the physical effort he was expending, but because again from the camp had come that blood-freezing howl. A lighter line marked the lip of the cut in which the stream was set, something he had not foreseen. He threw himself down to crawl the last few feet, hugging the earth. That very pale luminescence was easily accounted for by what lay below. Shan licked his lips and tasted the sting of sap smeared on his face during this struggle with the bushes. All the strip of meadow behind him now had been spotted with light plants. The cut below showed an almost solid line of them stringing willow-wise along the water's edge. To go down at this point was simply to spotlight his presence for any Throg on his trail. He could only continue along the upper bank, hoping to finally find an end to the growth of luminescent vegetation below. That's questionable folklore. Meat. Gross. Shan was perhaps 5 yards from the point where he had come to the river, when a commotion behind made him freeze and turn his head cautiously. The camp was half hidden, and the fires there must be dying, but a twisting, struggling mass was rolling across the meadow in his general direction. Thorvald, fighting off an attack? The Wolverines? Shan drew his legs under him, ready to erupt into the counteroffensive. He hesitated between drawing stunner or knife. In his brush with the injured Throg at the wreck, the stunner had had little impression on the enemy, and now he wondered if his blade, though it was super steel at its toughest, could pierce any joint in the armored bodies of the aliens. There was surely a fight in progress. The whole crazily weaving blot collapsed and rolled down upon 3 bright light plants. Dull sheen of Throg casing was revealed. No sign of fur, or flesh, or clothing. 2 of the aliens battling? But why? One of those figures got up stiffly, bent over the huddle still on the ground, and pulled at something. The wooden shaft of Shan's spear was wanly visible, and the form on the ground did not stir as that was jerked loose. The Throg leader dead? Shan hoped so. He slid his knife back into the sheath, tapped the hilt to make sure it was firmly in place, and crawled on. The river, twisting here and there, was a promising pool of dusky shadow ahead. The bank of willow things was coming to an end, and none too soon. For when he glanced back again, he saw another Throg run across the meadow, and he watched them lift their fellow, carrying him back to camp. The Throgs might seem indestructible, but he had put an end to one, aided by luck, and a very rough weapon. With that to bolster his self-confidence to a higher notch, Shan dropped by cautious degrees over the bank and down to the water's edge. When his boots splashed into the oily flood, he began to tramp downstream, feeling the pull of the water, first ankle-high, and then about his calves. This early in the season they did not hot. I think that's a typo. Yes, it is a typo. We're going to try that over. This early in the season they did not have to fear floods, and hereabouts the stream was wide and shallow, save in mid-current at the center point. Twice more he had to skirt patches of light plants, and once a young tree stood bathed in radiance with a pinkish tinge instead of the usual ghostly gray. Within the haze which tinted the drooping branches flitted small glittering, flying things, and the scent of its half-open buds was heavy on the air, neither pleasant nor unpleasant in Shan's nostrils. Merely different. He dared to whistle. A soft call he hoped would carry along the cut between the high banks, but, though he paused and listened until it seemed that every cell in his thin body was occupied in that act, he heard no answering calls from the Wolverines, nor any suggestion that either the animals or Thorvald were headed in the direction of the raft. What was he going to do if none of the others joined him downstream? Thorvald had said not to linger there past daylight. Yet Shan knew that unless he actually sighted a Throg patrol splashing around him, he would wait until he made sure of the others' fate. Both Taggy and Hoagie were as important to him as the survey officer. Perhaps more so, he told himself now. because he understood them to a certain degree and found companionship in their undemanding company, which he could not claim from the man. Why did Thorvald insist upon their going on to the seashore? To Shan's mind, his own first plan of holing up back in the eastern mountains was better. Those heights had as many hiding places as the fjord country. But Thorvald had suddenly become so set on this westward trek that he had given in. As much as he inwardly rebelled when he took them, he found himself obeying the older man's orders. It was only when he was alone, as now, that he began to question both Thorvald's motives and his authority. 3 sprigs of light bush set in a triangle. Shan paused and then climbed out on the bank, shaking the water from his boots as Taggy might shake out such drops from a furred limb. This was the sign they had set to mark their rendezvous point. But Shan whirled, drawing his stunner. The raft was a dark blob on the surface of the water some feet farther on, and now it was bobbing up and down violently. That was not the result of any normal tug of current. He heard an indignant squeal and relaxed with a little laugh. He need not have worried about the wolverines. That bait had drawn them all right. Both of them were now engaged in eating, though they had to conduct their feast on the rather shaky foundation of the makeshift transport. They paid no attention as he waded out, pulling at the anchor cord as he went. The wind must have carried his familiar scent to them. As the water climbed to his shoulders, Shan put one hand on the outmost log of the raft. One of the animals snarled a warning at being disturbed. Or had that been at him? Shan stood where he was, listening intently. Yes, there was a splashing sound from upstream. Whoever followed his own recent trail was taking no care to keep that pursuit a secret, and the pace of the newcomer was fast enough to spell trouble. Frogs? Tensely, the Terran waited for some reaction from the wolverines. He was sure that if the aliens had followed him, both animals would give warning. Save when they had gone wild upon hearing that strange wail from the camp, they avoided meeting the enemy. But from all sounds, the animals had not stopped feeding, so the other was no beetle. On the other hand, why would Thorvald so advertise his coming unless the need for speed was greater than caution? Shan drew taut the mooring cord, bringing out his knife to saw through that tough length. A figure passed the 3-sprig signal, ran onto the raft. "Lanty?" The call came in a hoarse, demanding whisper. "Here. Cut loose. We have to get out of here." Thorvald flung himself forward, and together the men scrambled up on the raft. The mangled carcass plunged into the water, dislodged by their efforts. But before the wolverines could follow it, the mooring vine snapped, and the river current took them. Feeling the raft sway and begin to spin, the wolverines whined, crouched in the middle of what now seemed a very frail craft. Behind them, far away but too clear, sounded that eerie howling, topping the sigh of the night wind. "I saw," Thorvald gasped, pausing as if to catch full lungfuls of air to back his words. "They have a hound. That's what you hear." End of chapter 4. All right. So it'd been a couple days, and they now did their native people attack, which is interesting. It's an interesting plan to convince the aliens, the Throgs, that there's native folk about. They did it, and they escaped. It's a choice. Yeah. I don't know if it would have been a choice that I would have done, but it is a choice. It seems like an aggressive choice, and I understand like why you would do that to an extent, but at the same time, I don't. Which is why I'm thinking that maybe I don't know. Maybe Thorvald isn't Thorvald. That wouldn't be like the first time that that's ever happened. Or maybe he is and he's just crazy and bent on power and just wants to, I don't know, take out all the Throgs. I don't know. Or if he has something like bigger planned, then it won't be like a shock. I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But they made it out alive. And so did the Wolverines. That's all that matters. But they have a hound, which is interesting to me. And the way that Thorvald was talking about it makes me think that this hound is the actual threat. Where we thought that Throgs were a threat, like maybe this hound is like way more vicious. And like can track. Maybe he's secretly low ranking and just pretending to be higher up. That's interesting. Hmm. Yeah, there was a part where Shan was like almost questioning whether or not he should be taking orders from him. Interesting, interesting. All right, chapter 5. This will be the last chapter of the night. We are 21% of the way through, but that's probably a lie. Because we all know that there's always end notes that don't really count as the book, but apparently count as the percentage. All right, getting comfy over here. Chapter 5. Pursuit. As the raft revolved slowly, it also slipped downstream at a steadily increasing pace, for the current had them in hold. The wolverines pressed close to Shan until the musky scent of their fur, their animal warmth, enveloped him. One growled deep in its throat, perhaps in answer to that wind-borne wail. "A hound?" Shan asked. Beside him in the dark, Thorvald was working loose one of the poles they had readied to help control the raft's voyaging. The current carried them along, but there was a need for those lengths of sapling to fend them free from rocks and water-buried snags. "What hound?" the younger man demanded more sharply when there came no immediate answer. "The Throg's tracker. But why did they import one?" Thorvald's puzzlement was plain in his tone. He added a moment later with some of his usual firmness. "We may be in for bad trouble now. Use of a hound means an attempt to take prisoners." "Then they do not know that we are here as Terrans, I mean?" Thorvald seemed to be sorting out his thoughts when he replied to that. "They could have brought a hound here just on chance that they might miss one of us in the initial mop-up. Or, if they believe we are natives, they could want a specimen for study." "Wouldn't they just blast down Terrans on sight?" Shan saw the dark blot, which was Thorvald's head, shake in negation. "They might need a live Terran. Badly. And soon." "Why?" "To operate the camp call beam." Shan's momentary bewilderment vanished. He knew enough of survey procedure to guess the reason for such a move on the part of the aliens. Terabug, thanks you so much for the follow. Welcome in. Hello. Hi. He knew enough of survey procedure to guess the reason for such a move on the part of the aliens. The settler transport? Yes, the ship. We won't plan it here without the proper signal, and the Throgs can't give that. If they don't take her, their time's run out before they have even made a start here. But how could they know that the transport is nearly due? When we intercept their calls, they're pure gibberish to us. Can they read our codes? The supposition is that they can't. Only, concerning Throgs, all we know is supposition. Anyway, they do know the routine for establishing a Terran colony, and we can't alter that procedure, except in small, non-essentials, Thorvald said grimly. If that transport doesn't pick up the proper signal to set down here on schedule, her captain will call in the patrol escort, then exit one Throg base. But if the beetles can trick the ship in and take her, then they'll have a clear 5 or 6 more months here to consolidate their own position. After that, it won't take more than just one patrol cruiser to clear Warlock. It will require a fleet. So the Throgs will have another world to play with, and an important one. This lies on the direct line between the Odin and Kolkin systems. A Throg base on such a trade route could eventually cut us right out of this quarter of the galaxy. So you think that they want to capture us in order to bring the transport in? By our type of reasoning, that would be a logical move, if they know we are here. They haven't too many of those hounds, and they don't risk them on petty jobs. I'd hoped we'd covered our trail well, but we had to risk that attack on the camp. I needed the map case. Again, Thorvald might have been talking to himself. Time, and the right maps. He brought his fist down on the raft, making the platform tremble. That's what I have to have now. Another patch of light willows stretched along the riverbanks, and as they sailed through that ribbon of ghostly radiance, they could see each other's faces. Thorvald's was bleak, hard, his eyes on the stream behind them, as if he expected at any moment to see a Throg emerge from the surface of the water. Oh, Atkinson, thank you so much for redeeming Hydrate. Thank you. The Hulk Hogan sector, exactly. Culkin. It was. I got a little stuck on that one. We'll just call it the Hulk Hogan sector from now on. I like that name much better. Suppose that thing, Shan pointed upstream with his chin, follows us. What is it anyway? Hound suggested Terran dog, but he couldn't stretch his imagination to believe in a working cooperation between Throg and any mammal. A rather spectacular combination of toad and lizard, with a few other grisly touches, is about as close as you can get to a general description, and that won't be too accurate, because like the Throgs, its remote ancestors must have been of the insect family. If the thing follows us, and I think we can be sure that it will, we'll have to take steps. There's always this advantage. Those hounds cannot be controlled from a flyer, and the beetles never take kindly to foot slogging, so we won't have to expect any speedy chase. If it slips its masters in rough country, we can try to ambush it. In the dim light, Thorvald was frowning. I flew over the territory ahead on 2 sweeps, and it is a odd mixture. If we can reach the rough country bordering the sea, we'll have won the first round. I don't believe that the Throgs will be in a hurry to track us in there. They'll try 2 alternatives to chasing us on foot. 1, use their energy beams to rake any suspect valley, and since there are hundreds of valleys, all pretty much alike, that will take some time. Or they can attempt to shake us out with the dum-dum, should they have one, which I doubt. Shan tensed. The stories of the effects of the Throg's dum-dum weapon was anything but pretty. Hulkmania is running wild. And to get a dum-dum, Thorvald continued, as if we were discussing a purely theoretical matter, and not a threat or something worse than death, they'll have to bring in one of their major ships, which they will hesitate to do with a cruiser near at hand. Our own danger spot, now, is the section we should strike soon after dawn tomorrow if the rate of this current is what I have timed it. There is a band of desert on this side of the mountains. The river gorge deepens there, and the land is bare. Let them send a ship over, and we could be as visible as if we were sending up flares. How about taking cover now, and going on only at night? Suggested Shan. Ordinarily I'd say yes, but with time pressing us now, no. If we keep straight on, we could reach the foothills in about 40 hours. Maybe less. And we have to stay with the river. To strike across country there without good supplies and on foot is sheer folly. 2 days. With perhaps the Throgs unleashing their hound on land, combing from their flyers, with the desert. Shan put out his hands to the wolverines. The prospect certainly didn't seem anywhere near as simple as it had the night before when Thorvald had planned this escape. But then, the survey officer had left out quite a few points which were not pertinent. Was he also leaving out other essentials? Shan wanted to ask, but somehow he could not. After a while he dozed, his head resting on his knees. He awoke, roused out of a vivid dream, a dream so detailed and so deeply impressed in a picture of his mind that he was confused when he blinked at the riverbank visible in the half-light of early dawn. Instead of that stretch of earth and ragged vegetation now gliding past him as the raft angled along, he should have been fronting a vast skull stark against the sky, a skull whose outlines were oddly inhuman, from whose eye-holes issued and returned flying things while its sharply protruding lower jaw was lapped by water. In color, that skull had been a violent clash of blood red and purple. Shan blinked again at the riverbank, seeing transposed on it still that ghostly haze of bone-bare dome, cavernous eye-holes, and nose-slit, fanged jaws. That skull was a mountain, or a mountain was a skull, and it was important to him. He must locate it. He moved stiffly, his legs and arms cramped but not cold. The wolverines stirred on either side of him. Thorvald continued to sleep, curled up beyond, the pole still clasped in his hands. A flat map case was slung by a strap about his neck, its thin envelope between his arms and his body as if for safekeeping. On the smooth flap was the survey seal, and it was fastened with a finger lock. Thorvald had lost some of the bright, hard surface he had shown at the spaceport where Shan had first sighted him. There were hollows in his cheeks, sending into high relief those bone ridges beneath his eye sockets, giving him a faint resemblance to the skull of Shan's dream. His face was grimed, his field uniform stained and torn. Only his hair was as bright as ever. Shan smeared the back of his hand across his own face, not doubting that he must present an even more disreputable appearance. He leaned forward, cautiously, to look into the water, but that surface was not quite enough to act as a mirror. Getting to his feet as the raft bobbed under his shift of weight, Shan studied the territory now about them. He could not match Thorvald's inches, just as he must have a third less bulk than the officer, but standing, he could sight something of what now lay beyond the rising banks of the cut. That grass, which had been so thick in the meadowlands around the camp, had thinned into separate clumps, pale lavender in color. And the scrawniness of stem and blade suggested dehydration and poor soil. The earth showing between those clumps was not of the usual blue, but pallid, too, bleached to gray, while the bushes along the stream's edge were few and smaller. They must have crossed the line into the desert Thorvald had promised. Shan edged around to face west. There was light enough in the sky to sight tall black pyramids waiting. They had to reach those distant mountains whose feet on the other side were resting in seawater. He studied them carefully, surveying each peak he could separate from its fellows. Did the skull lie among them? The conviction that the place he had seen in his dreams was real, that it was to be found on Warlock, persisted. Not only was it a definite feature of the landscape somewhere in the wild places of this world, but it was also necessary for him to locate it. Why? Shan puzzled over that, with a growing uneasiness which was not quite fear. Not yet, anyway. Thorvald moved. The raft tilted, and the wolverines became growly. Shan sat down, one hand out on the officer's shoulder in warning. Feeling that touch, Thorvald shifted, one hand striking out blindly in a blow which Shan was just able to avoid, while the other he pinned the map case yet tighter to him. "Take it easy," Shan urged. The other's eyelids flicked. He looked up, but not as if he saw Shan at all. "The cavern of the veil," he muttered. "Utgard." Then his eyes did focus, and he sat up, gazing around him with a frown. "We're in the desert," Shan announced. Thorvald got up, balancing on feet planted a little apart, looking to the faded expanse of the waste spreading from the river cut. He stared at the mountains before he squatted down to fumble with the lock of the map case. The wolverines were growing restless, though they still did not try to move about too freely on the raft, greeting Shan with a vocal complaint. He and Thorvald could satisfy their hunger with a handful of concentrates from the survival kit, but those dry tablets could not serve the animals. Shan studied the terrain with more knowledge than he had possessed a week earlier. This was not hunting land, but there remained the bounty of the river. "We'll have to feed Taggy and Toki," he broke the silence abruptly. "If we don't, they'll be into the river and off on their own." Thorvald glanced up from one of the tough, thin sheets of map skin, again as if he had been drawn back from some distance. His eyes moved from Shan to the unpromising shore. "How? With what?" he wanted to know. Then the real urgency of the situation must have penetrated his mental isolation. "You have an idea?" "There's those fish we found them eating back by the mountain stream," Shan said, recalling an incident of a few days earlier. "Rocks here, too, like those the fish were hiding under. Maybe we can locate some of them here." He knew that Thorvald would be reluctant to work the raft inshore, to spare time for such hunting, but there would be no arguing with hungry wolverines, and he did not propose to lose the animals for the officer's whim. However, Thorvald did not protest. They pulled the raft out of the main pull of the current, sending it in towards the southern shore of the lee of a clump of light willows. Shan scrambled ashore. "Jake, thank you so much for the follow. Welcome in. Hello. Hi." Shan scrambled ashore, the wolverines after him, sniffling along at his heels while he overturned likely-looking rocks to unroof some odd underwater dwellings. The fish with rudimentary legs were present and not agile enough, even in their native element, to avoid well-clawed paws, which scooped them neatly out of the river shallows. There was also a sleek, furred creature with a broad, flat head and paddle-equipped forepaws, rather like a miniature seal, which Taggy appropriated before Shan had a chance to examine it closely. In fact, the wolverines wrought havoc along a half-mile section of bank before the Terran could coax them back to the raft. As they hunted, Shan got a better idea of the land about the river. It was sere, the vegetation dwindling except for some rough spikes of things pushing through the parched ground like flayed fingers, their puffed redness in contrast to the usual amethystine color of Warlock's growing things. Under the climbing sun, that whole stretch of country was revealed in a stark bareness which at first repelled and then began to interest him. He discovered Thorvald standing on the upper bluff, looking out towards the waiting mountains. The officers turned as Shan urged the wolverines to the raft, and when he jumped down the drop to join them, Shan saw he carried a map strip unrolled in his hand. "The situation is not as good as we hoped," he told the younger man. "We'll have to leave the river to cross the heights." "Why?" "There are rapids bending in a falls." The officer squatted down, spreading out the strip and making stabs at it with a nervous fingertip. "Here we have to leave. This is all rough ground, but lying to the south there's a gap which may be a pass. This was made by an aerial survey." Shan knew enough to realize to what extent such a guide could go wrong. Main features of the landscape would be clear enough from aloft, but there might be unsurmountable difficulties at ground level which were not distinguishable from the air. Yet Thorvald had planned this journey as if he had already explored their escape route, and that it was as open and easy as a stroll down Tyr's main transport way. Why was it so necessary that they try to reach the sea? However, since he had no objection to voice except a dislike for indefinite information, Shan did not question the other's calm assumption of command. Not yet, anyway. As they embarked and worked back into the current, Shan studied his companion. Thorvald had freely listed the difficulties lying before them, yet he did not seem in the least worried about their being able to win through to the sea, or, if he was, his outer shell of unconcern remained uncracked. Before their first day together had ended, the younger Terran had learned that, to Thorvald, he was only another tool, to be used by the survey officer in some project which the other believed of primary importance, and his resentment of the valuation was under control so far. He valued Thorvald's knowledge, but the other's attitude chilled and rebuffed his need for something more than a half-partnership of work. Why had Thorvald come back to Warlock in the first place? And why had it been necessary for him to risk his life, perhaps more than his life, if their theory was correct concerning the Throg's wish to capture a Terran? To get that set of maps from the plundered camp? When he had first talked of that raid, his promised loot had been supplies to fill their daily needs. There had been no mention of maps. By all signs, Thorvald was engaged on some mission. And what would happen if he, Shan, suddenly stopped being the other's obedient underling and demanded a few explanations here and now? Only Shan knew enough about men to also know that he would not get any information out of Thorvald that the latter was not ready to give, and that such a showdown, coming prematurely, would only end in his own discomfiture. He smiled wryly now, remembering his emotions when he had first seen Ragnar Thorvald months ago, as if the officer ever considered the likes, dislikes, or dreams of one Shan Lanty. No, reality and dreams seldom approached each other. Dreams. On any of those shoreline maps, he asked suddenly, do they have marked a mountain shaped like a skull? Thorvald thrust with his pole. Skull, he repeated, a little absently, as he so often did in answer to Shan's questions, unless they dealt with some currently important matter. An odd sort of skull, Shan said, just as vividly as when he first awakened. He could picture that skull mountain with the flying thing about its eye sockets. And that, too, was odd. Dream impressions usually faded with the passing of waking hours. It has a protruding lower jaw, and the waves wash that red and purple rock. What? He had Thorvald's complete attention now. Where did you hear about that? The demand followed quickly. I didn't hear about it. I dreamed of it last night. I stood there right in front of it. There were birds, or things flying like birds, going in and out of the eye holes. What else? Thorvald leaned across his pole, his eyes alive, avid, as if he would pull the reply he wanted out of Shan by force. That was all I remember. The Skull Mountain. He did not add his other impression, that he was meant to find that skull, that he must find it. Nothing. Thorvald paused, and then spoke slowly with a visible reluctance. Nothing else? No cavern with a green veil? A wide green veil strung across it? Shan shook his head. Just the Skull Mountain. Thorvald looked as if he didn't quite believe that, but Shan's expression must have been convincing, for he laughed shortly. Well, there goes one nice neat theory up in smoke. No, your skull doesn't appear on any of our maps, and so probably my cavern does not exist either. They may both be smoke screens. What? Shan never finished the query. A wind was rising in the desert to blow across the slit which held the river, carrying with it a fine shifting of sand which coasted down into the water as a gray haze, coating men, animals, and raft, and sighing as snow sighs when it falls. Only that did not draw out another cry, a thin cry, diluted by the miles of land stretching behind them, but yet carrying that long, ululating howl they had heard in the Throg camp. Thorvald grinned mirthlessly. The hounds on trail. He bent to the pole, using it to aid the pace of the current. Shan, chilled in spite of the sun's heat, followed his example, wondering if time had ceased to fight on their side. End of the chapter. Alright, so both Shan and Thorvald have had dreams of things that they feel that they must find, and that is super interesting to me. Dun dun dun! Like, Thorvald definitely has another mission in mind, whether that was sanctioned by Terra or he just has an alternative thing, hunt, adventure that he's going on. I don't know. But I have questions. Just like Shan, I have many questions. Ooh, and I'm excited. Okay, so we're obviously gonna find a Skull Mountain. And what that means, I don't know. And what this green veiled business is, I don't know. But I'm excited. And the Throgs have just released the Hound to hunt them down. Okay, the Throgs are also super interesting. If they need a Terran to send off a signal, but do they need a Terran for something else? For some other study? Whether nefarious or otherwise? I don't know. I don't know. I have lots of questions and no answers. Hopefully we'll get answers next time. But yeah, that's going to be it for today. Thank you all for being here. Many questions, few bananas. Exactly. Thank you all for being here. I will be back on tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Central, doing reading sprints, productivity sprints, however you want to use the time. Just listening to lo-fi and hanging out mostly. For more story time, continuing Storm Over Warlock, it will be on Tuesday, 4 p.m. Central. So if I don't see you tomorrow, I hope to see you very soon. As always, whether you lurk, whether you chat, I just appreciate you being here and I appreciate your support. So thank you so, so much. And I will see you all very soon. Have a good one. Bye.